kiss for you.
Hello, today's topic is going to be about choice analysis and decision fatigue and me and trying to understand my backlog and get through my backlog the best and most efficient way that I can and trying to help you do the same. So the first thing I really want to point out here and understanding really in games how choice paralysis affects us is the fact that it's not just games, right? We know a lot of time from these studies that have been done, specifically in things like identifying children and their tendency to have choice paralysis or the tendency of others in choosing things like a flavor of ice cream or a flavor of jam for the jam study, as well as tendencies of humans when they're faced with choice paralysis. You often get things like doctors prescribing antibiotics, more frequently as the day goes on, as their decision-making skills become less and less. Ultimately, the decision fatigue that we get from this as it's being studied, weighs us down. And I think a lot of people know this, but what they might not understand is affects games, at least to me, very specifically because of something that I really like that this article points out here when it's also talking about, willpower being a resource and the fact that every decision that you make strains your mind, numbs you to each subsequent decision you have to make. In order to cope with that, not get overloaded, your brain starts to simplify things, throwing out the non-essential bits to reduce the complexity. And what I really kind of take away from this, and what I really kind of take away from my example I'm going to give, is when you remove complexity from an object here, especially as an object as complex as games tend to be, you get really simplistic sort of understanding of that item. The best way I can describe it is kind of like abstraction. And the example I'm going to use is something that happened recently. If I go to the Kindle Paperwhite that I ended up getting, right, you can literally check a box that says add my account to it to make setup easier. Yeah, link device to your Amazon account to simplify setup. So when you buy it, you can just click the add button. It'll say, hey, all that stuff. It tells you it's the most recent model, and it will automatically set you up with this device. You don't have to do anything. You don't even have to, all you have to do is connect it to Wi-Fi, right? And everything else is basically taken care of. It'll tell you, hey, you should download the app. You don't have to. And basically it makes things really easy. You can order this within 7 hours. It gets delivered to your house. You open it up. It's already logged in and set up with your account in place. You just have to set up a Wi-Fi. Then all of a sudden you're good to go. And they even make it easier to be like, okay, now you might say, well, it's a Kindle. I don't have any ebooks or whatever with it. They make it real easy. They give you 3 months free of Kindle Unlimited. So if you just click on that thing, it's not an additional charge on here, right? It's the same price. You'll get Kindle Unlimited, and you'll get 3 million books or whatever, and audiobooks and all that. It has Bluetooth, so you can hook up headphones. And all of a sudden, you have a device. You went from before buying the device, no device that could reasonably read like this, and now you have a device in your hand that can do that with millions of books and audiobooks and already set up with your account. It makes it extremely easy to do something like this. The problem with the super convenience that we've done and the overabundance of 3 million books is that you start to get decision fatigue. But more importantly, you stop being able to process the decisions that you need to make. And so you, as the article talked about, start making worse decisions. You start doing things like prescribing more medicine, even if that's probably not what you should be doing. You start not buying anything. This jam study talks about, hey, if you have 6 flavors or 30 flavors, people like the 30 flavors, but they don't end up buying any of them. They buy when they only have 6. They don't buy when they have 30. In that case, it's hey, my objective was to get jam, and I came out with not doing anything because there was too many choices. Doctor prescribing, I came out with a worse decision because I kept prescribing stuff instead of thinking about the choices I make. Banks approving loans, same thing. This, as it applies to everyday life and decisions in life, in a stricter capacity in games. Not that complicated. It's either you like the flavor or you don't like the flavor of this jam that you're going to put on various things. Prescription, a little bit more complicated, ultimately trying to fix whatever problem that ails them. There's not that many choices. If you need a specific medication and it's a prescription base, it's probably because you need that specific medication. Games are not simple. Not simple. This is my backlog on PC. 42 items here, 41 items, another 13-ish items here. That ends up being 53 items. Plus, I have Switch. This is a horrible screenshot. Just bought 11 Switch games, bringing my total of backlog on Switch to 45. On top of the 53 here. That's about 98 different games that I have in my backlog. Now, obviously, that's a first world problem, buying too much of a good thing. Like, I look at these, figuring out what I want to play, is I have to ultimately reduce, as the articles kept talking about, you have to reduce what you're doing to a very simplified form, or do the other thing that I'll talk about in a second, but you simplify stuff, right? So when I think of something like Control, what am I thinking of? I'm thinking of walking through hallways and, shooting stuff and having crazy particles and, SCP kind of crazy story and that kind of stuff. If I'm thinking of Cyberpunk, I'm thinking of the world and the city and, first-person shooter elements and all that. If I'm thinking of something like Gloomhaven, I'm thinking of a standard CRPG with movement of a camera and turn-based action and card system, right, and all that. If I'm thinking of something like The Division 2, I'm thinking of going through, Washington, D.C. and crawling down into it and, shooting stuff in third-person cover shooter combat and using my drone and different mechanics. Ultimately, I'm going to reduce every one of these games to their essential components I can think about in my brain to choose to do something without remembering all the other stuff around it. And the best example I can give to why that's a problem is when you look at something, and I'm going to have to bring this up on a different monitor here, is something like Super Mario Wonder. The reason I bring Mario Wonder up is because you could just say, oh, it's a 2D platformer. Oh, it's the standard 2D platformer that, Nintendo's been doing forever and all that. But if you actually play this game, or if you play Kirby and the Forgotten Land, or if you play Tears of the Kingdom, or if you play any of these other big flagship Nintendo games, you quickly understand that these experiences are very complete, and they give you a feeling that is so much harder to describe than just, oh, it's a 2D platformer, right? And it's not just Nintendo, but I think Nintendo does a pretty good job of giving you that soul and giving you that fun that's really hard to boil down. If I had a list like the list I have here, and I saw Super Mario Wonder on this, and I opened it up, the decision to make to play that game would be a disservice to the other qualities of the game that my brain's not going to think about at that time. The smaller things, the ones that I'd have to go into depth into to explain why it's so much fun or what the joy of that is. And that's for all these games, right? Even games that aren't Nintendo stuff that are critically acclaimed and all that have elements that you're not going to think about when you're deciding to play it, but ultimately make your enjoyment, make your experience fun. And so what do? Well, when you can't think of these crazy things, when you can't think about how good these games are, what you end up doing is just going to what you're used to. And in my case, that's Brawlhalla. And the only reason it's like that is because I like Smash Brothers and played that a while and needed something like that. A lot of people have that, right? They have their one or two games they go really hard into, either free to play or not. And so whatever you end up doing, whatever thing you end up kind of focusing on, becomes your default. And so when I don't know what to play, when I'm just looking through all those games and be like, I don't know if I want this or this one or whatever, most of the time, I end up going to Brawlhalla. I end up just playing this game and not thinking about anything else. And then all of a sudden, the time that I had to play, whatever game I was looking forward to, I no longer have time to play because I was playing this default game, which isn't bad, but, it's a default game. It's not something you're going to be, super proud of, like, oh, I just went back to the default. I just went back to the thing I always play that I have hundreds of hours into, right? It never feels good to do that. It never feels like, oh, I accomplished something, especially if you're trying to get to your backlog. And so ultimately, I can say all this, and what does it mean? And the ultimate thing I want to get across is that it means that no matter what you're trying to accomplish in your backlog, the thing that worked for me, and the thing that I think can ultimately work for a number of other people, focusing on one thing at a time. And importantly, that meant focusing on one thing at a time, respect to the other games I would typically play. Because what you can't do in this almost addiction of trying to figure out how to get through items in general is you can't just say, okay, I'm not going to play the game I always play, Brawlhalla, or anything else, whatever your game of choice that you go into is. I'm not just going to all of a sudden stop playing that because I'm trying to get through whatever game I'm trying to get through. Because that's ultimately going to fill you with not a reason to continue playing the game, because you'd be like, I'm bored of this, let me just go back to whatever, right? It ends up breaking the cycle. So what I was able to do is get through these three games, Catherine Full Body, Diablo 3, and Last Epoch, the campaigns of both of these two, and the entire game of this one. Ultimately, this one was about, 14 hours. This one was about like 20 hours. I did the expansion, and then this one was also about like 25 hours. So 20, 25, that's like 45, and let's say 15, 60 hours right there. So I was able to get through about 60 hours. I played this game. I beat it in about 4 days. It's only about, 14 hours long. It's a nice puzzle game with that Atlas style of storytelling and all that. Diablo 3 I was able to play after, giving up a little bit, trying, the first chapter or so, and then not really driving with it. So I went back and played it and beat it and put about, 25, 30 hours into it. This was on Switch. So I ended up having, a pretty good time with that and getting the build going. And the same thing with Last Epoch. I had started it, put about 5 hours into it at the start, restarted with a new character when 1.0, or just before 1.0 had launched, and then beat the campaign up to where it had ended, and put about 25 hours on top of the 5 I already did. So now I'm about, 33, 34 hours into it. And I did that because I played that game and only played that game. And the only time I didn't play that game was when I was playing my other game, Brawlhalla here, because I didn't want to say, oh, I'm not going to do that and focus on this, because I probably wouldn't have done that. And so ultimately I was able to get through 3 games of my backlog when it would have typically taken me months to do that. I did all these within, a month span. I actually finished a game and had fun with a game without needing to feel like I'm just wasting my time on something. And maybe that's just me, maybe that's just that thing, but I think in this world now where we are getting things so quick and so immediate with so much choice and all that, the ability to focus on one thing and the ability to kind of drill down into it and have a lot of fun with it is really important. It also brings us back to the Kindle story. And the reason it does that is because one thing you notice when you have a dedicated device like a Kindle, you don't get distracted by other things. You're not getting distracted by your phone notifications or by other things going on or by notifications through Discord or through pop-ups that you should be doing. You're not looking at the time. You're not looking at anything else. You're just looking at the book that you're reading. And specifically the book that you're reading, there's not going to be any pop-ups. There's not going to be any annoying things. You can focus on that specifically. And to me, the ability to do that with games is something that we don't have yet. The idea maybe is that that's what consoles are for, right? The idea behind a console is, it's specifically for this thing so you can forget everything else and not have to worry about it. Well, a lot of the time, at least from my experience, the only time that really works is when you have something like a portable device, right? A handheld like a Steam Deck or a Switch, because it is something you don't have to dedicate yourself to. The reason I like a Kindle right now is because I can just go over there, pick up my Kindle, read a little bit, put it down, leave, all within a very quick span. I don't have to grab my controller, go up to the thing, turn it on, turn on the TV, wait for all that to sync up, wait for my controller to connect to it, go into the menu, find the game I want, play the game I want, exit the game I want, then put the entire thing to sleep. That's a lot. That's not just, go over, press a button, read, press a button, go. That's way, way different when you have something like a Switch or a Steam Deck. You can just do that. Same thing with the Kindle. You can just, pick up and go, or pick up and do the thing and then leave. You don't have to make it a whole ordeal, basically. And I really enjoy that idea that you can just have something immediate, which is why I bought 11 games for the Switch, even though I have a new $2,000 PC here, which can crank graphics like crazy. I don't want that. I want the thing on the Switch because I'm playing a lot of games on Switch, because that's just where I feel that I get the most, and I appreciate a lot of genres of games that I might not like. I might not have played Diablo 3. I probably wouldn't have played Diablo 3 if I got it on PC rather than Switch. I definitely wouldn't have played Catherine Fullbody on PC. I probably wouldn't have played Last Epoch if it wasn't a game I was already playing and 1.0 was coming out and I wanted to make a guide and all that. I really wanted to get into it because I felt like I didn't. I felt like I didn't have that hook in yet. And when it got in, it was like, okay, this is great. You get a lot of that with your backlog. The backlog I have here is overwhelming because it's all out on this thing. It's a bunch of different games, which one you want to go, and you go through this list. If I focus on one game, in this case, for any backlog game, I'm focusing on Assassin's Creed Origins right now because I put the most amount of time into that game of the games, and I was like, okay, that means I clearly am interested in it, so let me just finish that up, ignore everything else, but this game and Brawlhalla, and we'll be good, and I'll be able to finish it, and then move on to the next thing. And ultimately, I think that's really what people should be doing, or it's just, my suggestion. Very obvious to me that this choice here is having a detrimental effect on our ability to enjoy anything. And that sucks. feels really good to do that. And it feels like, yes, this is productive and this is good. And you don't get that when you're stuck in decision fatigue. As the article said, willpower and the ego drain ultimately stops us from liking these things, which isn't good. It's a resource and you need to keep it intact. And I think the best way to keep it intact is limiting yourself. So hopefully someone found that useful, and see everyone in the next video.